Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
Tonight's broadcast is brought to you by Free Flow 2014. Free Thought Florida Orlando. It's coming up October 10th through the 12th. Details at free-flow.org. A 3-day weekend that looks like it's going to be even bigger than last year's event, which I was privileged to be a part of. Lawrence Krauss is the keynote this year, and they're going to be screening The Unbelievers along with the producers of the film to do a big Q&A after they show the movie. By the way, I'm in The Unbelievers for about 0.00004 seconds. There's a shot where Krauss is walking around at the Reason rally. He and I had not yet met. I'm running around with a video camera, and I see him. It's Lawrence Krauss. And so I just grab him. Hi, Dr. Krauss. I don't even remember what I said, but it was like a fanboy moment. And I didn't realize there was a film crew shooting that whole thing. So you see just like a portion of my face. That's my 0.0004 minutes of fame or whatever. Anyway, they'll be showing The Unbelievers there. I'll be there doing a presentation, also hosting the Atheist Trivia Night. That's on Saturday. The MC is going to be comedian Keith Lowell Jensen, terrific guy, Dr. Ryan Cragen, author of What You Don't Know About Religion But Should, Rebecca Hale, the president of the American Humanist Association, Mandisa Thomas, president of Black Nonbelievers, and a whole lot more. Just a great time of year to be in Orlando anyway. It's going to be an awesome weekend to hang out with your fellow Florida skeptics. October 10th through the 12th. It's Free Thought Florida Orlando, free-flow.org. That's free-flow.org, and I will see you there in October. I'm a little loopy tonight. I woke up with that kind of stuffy sore throat thing, which is that fork in the road. It's going to be one of two things. Either one, it's a 24-hour deal, and I'll wake up tomorrow and it's just fine. Or two, I'll wake up tomorrow and pray for merciful death. So I'm heavily medicated. I feel all right. The voice may leave me, so I'm going to let my special guest tonight do most of the heavy lifting. But before I bring him on, I was reading a hysterical article about Discovery Channel's Shark Week. Now, we've often lamented sort of the death of the credibility of the Discovery Channel. And you're talking to a guy who used to love almost everything the Discovery Channel did. I'm still a Mythbusters fan, and they still have some shows from time to time, but most of what they've been putting out lately is not just schlock, but it's highly suspect science-wise, and Shark Week is a great example. Last year, they did that big show, a fake documentary about the megalodon. And this week, they're doing a whole bunch of stuff kind of like it. Well, apparently, a shark expert decided he was just going to binge. He was going to just mainline Shark Week episodes, one after the other. His name is David Schiffman. He's a PhD student studying sharks at the University of Miami. And I guess he's made it his mission to hold the Discovery Channel to task for all the crap that they are showing during Shark Week. So he decided he was going to watch all the Shark Week shows aired in 2014. He's going to watch every one of them. And I guess it has driven him to the brink of madness. I was looking at some of his tweets. The species of hammerheads are wrong, whether or not they are endangered. He talks about how they hugely sensationalize the dangers of shark attack and shark bite. One of the tweets said, "More people are killed by cows, toasters, and flower pots than by sharks." Oh my goodness, it's just hysterical to watch if I think of it, I'll go back and put the link in the description box of this show, but to watch an actual scientist, observing these quote unquote educational shows about sharks It is revealing. That guy, the pastor with the red ball cap, his name is Josh Feuerstein, posted yet another video on YouTube with a $100,000 challenge to any atheist who can disprove the existence of God. Now, I get the sense that he is in it for the notoriety and the publicity. And for those of us who are familiar with marketing and branding, we get it, right? The close-up camera angle, the red ball cap, the beard. He's got a brand and he's working it. He's got a YouTube channel. He's uploading, I don't know how many videos he's uploaded already. He's getting attention, which is what he wanted. And so you and I have to have the cost-benefit discussion as to how much more attention we want to give the guy. The downside is that I see all these religious people reposting everything that this obviously enthusiastic young pastor puts out, and there is no refutation or rebuttal. So if we don't respond, then his claims don't get responded to. The $100,000 challenge is so laughable and just so mind-numbingly facepalm-worthy, I'm this close to posting a video response myself. The problem is I don't know if I want to give the guy any more attention than he's already got. But I mean, you and I already know the answer to the question. He's completely reversed the burden of proof. Prove God doesn't exist. I'll give you $100,000. Well, of course. Of course, that's the coward's way out. There's absolutely no way to disprove the existence of a deity, and that's not the position that non-believers hold anyway. We just say we don't buy it because we don't see any evidence. We follow the chain of evidence, and we appear to live in a natural world that's governed by natural laws. And if God shows up tomorrow, fine, we'll examine that evidence, and you and I'll talk over coffee. It'll be fun. But we don't go out and say definitively that God cannot exist, does not exist. I mean, there may be a few people who do that. There are those of us who say if a benevolent, interested God existed, he would have already tapped somebody on the shoulder. He would have certainly devised a much better plan than he implemented in any number of obviously man-made religions. But, to completely, and then he plays the Holocaust. The only reason that atheists would know that the Holocaust was horrible was because our God provided the objective moral standard by which they can measure horrific behavior. It's just the typical stuff that makes us crazy. You just want to shake the man. Anyway, I'll think about it. What else is going on? Oh, FYI, and no pressure on this at all. I was talking to my buddies Matt Dillahunty and Aaron Ra and Hemant Mehta and several other people who have started Patreon channels, which are essentially websites which allow people to be a patron of your work. So I'm going to go ahead and put a Patreon page together. And for anybody who wants to, I put the link in the description box of this video. And if you'd rather not, absolutely cool. I'm just glad you're part of the site and the shows. But some people donate on the website, and of course, we get the occasional sponsor, and I'm very, very thankful for any of the support that comes in. My special guest tonight is an author, a columnist, a public speaker, a proud atheist, and a firebrand of sorts. His name is C.J. Werleman. Just released a book called Atheists Can't Be Republicans, and he joins me on the air tonight. C.J., thanks for being on the radio.
Hello, Mr. Andrews. How are you?
Have you gotten a lot of hate and death and just vitriol in your email inbox from people who are Republicans and atheists? Who's this foreigner who's come to the United States of America to tell us what's wrong with our country? Don't tell me you haven't seen that kind of stuff in your inbox.
I get that a lot. I get a lot of the, well, if you don't like it, then fuck off back to your own home. So, I get that a lot. I also get a lot of, people who'd like to maim me, but as Christopher Hitchens said, the guy who sends you a death threat is the guy you don't need to worry about, because the guy who's going to actually do harm to you is not going to let you know he's coming.
You and I had lunch when you were in Oklahoma just a few weeks ago, and I was talking about how I used to be a dyed-in-the-wool, true blue Ronald Reagan Republican back in my religious days. And of course, you gave me that look of pity like I was, the poor man, that kind of thing.
To clarify, it's not that, Republicans make me physically ill. It's, the Democratic Party, much of the Democratic Party makes me ill. I think that, the Democrats are to the right of where the Republicans were 3-4 decades ago. It's, the Democratic Party where Reagan, I'm more concerned about liberalism and the collapse of liberalism in this country. And Reagan killed liberalism in America, and then Clinton Democrats buried its body. So it's not that I advocate for the Democratic Party either.
So hit the book for me. I mean, what's the general gist? We can't be Republicans because we would essentially be acting so monumentally illogically if we held to Republican positions.
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. I mean, the title is, Atheists Can't Be Republicans, but the subtitle is very important. If facts and evidence matter. I mean, an atheist can be anything he wants to be, he or she wants to be. They can be anything from a Nazi to a communist to a dyed-in-the-wall libertarian. But the key is facts and evidence matter, and what I do in this book, you're an atheist for one reason only. You see no evidence in the existence of God, so therefore you don't believe. Critical thinking is very important to an atheist. It's a value that we hold on to. And whilst atheism doesn't guarantee a smarter than thou intellect, it does enable atheists to be able to reject ideas and assertions which are patently wrong on face value. Now, if we apply the same litmus test to our religious non-belief as we do to politics, then clearly an atheist can't be a Republican, because almost every aspect of the Republican Party's platform has been proven abjectly false and dangerous in much the same way that religion is false and dangerous. Even today, the Republican Party's economic platform remains trickle-down economics, that if you give tax breaks to the wealthiest and the corporations in this country, then their further investment into capital and labour will trickle down to the rest of us. Well, every non-partisan economist in the world has routinely debunked the myth that work. In fact, it's the opposite. Economies grow from the bottom up. That is, when the consumer class has more to spend, then that flow of capital into the economy grows the economy out. Almost, no matter what part of the Republican Party's platform you pull apart, whether it's on the stimulus, in the middle of a recession, when Bush handed, Obama an economy which was hemorrhaging 800,000 jobs per month, and we had an annual deficit of $1.3 trillion, the Republican Party was calling for austerity. Now, on what fucking planet would you want to implement austerity when you're trying to get the economy going? When you're trying to stimulate it? Hello, there's the clue, stimulus. Now, when the Democrats put in the stimulus, the $800 billion stimulus, they said it would cause inflation. They said it would, wouldn't lead to any job creation and so forth. And by every measure, the stimulus was a success. Now, it was a success only moderately, and that's because the stimulus should have been a lot greater. If Liberals had their way, the stimulus would have been double the size of what it was. But nevertheless, the stimulus still added 2 to 3 points of GDP growth, and we've had 60-odd months of consecutive job growth in this country, predominantly in the private sector. Now, you can take that out to the healthcare. Obamacare is worse than slavery. Obamacare is going to kill job growth. Well, the Jobs Creation Index, the Gallup Job Creation Index, which came out this week, showed that job creation in this country is as strong as it's been in 6 years, i.e. since Obama came into office, since he hemorrhaged his economy in the ditch. Now, the Republicans said Obamacare would stymie job growth. We'd have to be back in a recession, and it's worse than slavery, and the Nazis will come for it. And so if Obamacare is worse, he's going to kill job growth. That doesn't measure out in the actual facts. So no matter what part of the Republican Party platform you look at, then it's been easily debunked, and that's what I do in this book.
How do you buttress the lower classes, the middle class? If it's not a trickle-down thing, what's the solution?
Well, the solution is what's already been done before. It's not like we have to, the solution for America is not something that has to be invented. It's just re-implementation. We went through the Gilded Age, the robber baron era in this country, where we had wanton capitalism, unfettered capitalism. America did look like the backdrop of a Great Gatsby movie through the 1920s, which led to the crash of Wall Street, which inevitably triggered the Great Depression. Now, we had a president at that stage, one of the last liberal presidents in this country, FDR, who implemented liberal reforms. He regulated Wall Street. He brought in employer protection, implemented Social Security. When FDR implemented those social reforms as a reaction to the unfettered capitalism and deregulation, which killed the entire fucking economic universe, social reforms and economic reforms implemented by FDR led to the great American middle class. The American middle class of the 1940s to the 1970s, i.e. the era of big federal government, was the era that America built the middle class, which was the envy of the entire world. That was an era where only the husband generally had a job. You still had an affordable mortgage. You had weekend leaves. You had 2 cars in the garage, and you had vacations at your leisure. And you retired on a pension and so forth. Now, we've gone from that, in that period of solid middle-class growth, where the top marginal tax rate in this country was 91%. Even Eisenhower, Republican, in the 1950s, said any effort to lower the top marginal tax rate from 91% to less would be irresponsible and immoral. And that's a Republican who said that. Now, if we had the greatest productivity in the 40s to 70s, with high marginal tax rates and with huge financial regulation, great worker protection in the form of, workers' rights and labour and so forth, then there's no reason why we can't have it again. And when we look across the world and we look at countries like Australia and Western Europe, particularly Australia, which has been immune from the global economic downturn, and as has Germany, it's because they have these liberal reforms in this country where workers are protected, where industry is also regulated and protected. And this is not rocket science. This is just breaking free of this mantra which has so many Americans conflating freedom with free trade. It's a damaging thought which, these radicals from the right have implemented in this country.
Well, CJ, when I hear you talk about the glory days of the big federal government, I mean, it's a very broad stroke you're painting. I mean, we're talking about an institution rife with corruption, rampant waste, lack of accountability, and it just seems to be getting more unwieldy with each passing year. And of course, whenever you say that, the people who are pro-big government will always point to the good things that it has done, and it has done many wonderful things. And the people who are more libertarian, they're like, yeah, absolutely, hell yeah, just cut it down to pieces, man. And of course, I think the problems are much more complex than that. But I mean, a big government, those of us who are a little dubious, does the government do it best? Do they do it most effectively? Are they the most accountable? Are career politicians the types of people who are working in the best interest of the electorate and not just their own? I mean, I think skepticism is warranted here. Are you saying, hey, big government is the solution? Do you trust these people?
Well, there's no alternative, because the alternative is to hand things over to the corporate state. Now, when I say big government, of course, I'm calling for effective government. You're always going to find wanton waste in government, particularly the most wasteful aspect of the federal government is the military. But it's funny how Republicans don't seem to have a problem with that. Oh, no, you can't cut expenditures for that. Now, effective government is something different. Now, the alternative and the libertarian worldview is that corporations in the free market will correct all rights and wrongs, which is such fundamental garbage. I mean, corporations have no interest in the common good. Corporations only have one purpose. They only exist for one purpose, and that is profit. Corporations lie, steal, pollute, impoverish, erode public safety nets, put workers out on the streets, all in the name of maximizing profit. In this country last year, 40,000 Americans died because a health insurance company deemed that their customer did not qualify for the coverage that they needed because it wasn't profitable for the health insurance company. Now, General Motors, take the Ford Motor Company, they did a cost-benefit analysis when they knew that their gas engine to the Ford Pinto would blow up. So they did a cost-benefit analysis, and they figured out that it was cheaper to still go ahead and release the car to market, knowing that people would die, but that was cheaper to do that than recall it and have to fix the problem. Now, that's what corporations will do today without government oversight. And everything that the Republican Party do is trying to deregulate and defund money to government oversight. So even though we have big government on the surface, it's starved of the funds it needs. Look at the SEC, the Stock Exchange Securities Commission. There's no wonder that not one single Wall Street banker didn't go to jail. It's because the SEC doesn't have the funds and the staff to prosecute these type of crimes. So there's no other alternative than effective government. And you can't just give up on government by saying it's big and bad and taking the libertarian strainers. You're going to end up in a country that looks like Somalia or looks like the South in America. I mean, the South in America already is third world.
I don't think we're talking about giving up. I think it's, we just point the eye of skepticism not just toward the private, but also the public institutions out there. And that's another broad stroke to say that corporations never work in the interest of the public, but only for profit. Certainly profit is the motivator. They want to make money, but they also do provide employment. They provide careers. They provide often benefits packages. They succeed. The employees succeed. Everyone succeeds. I know this is obviously a very, a very general look at it. And you look at people like Bill Gates and whatnot, and I think to myself, this man has made a ton of money, but he's also done a ton of good. I mean, he's a charitable man, in my opinion. I understand he's also an atheist. I mean, your opinion of big corporations is that they never work for the benefit of those within and without?
No, not at all. I'm still for enterprise, and socialism or social democracies or liberalism are not the antithesis of capitalism. It's not, replacing capitalism. But the problem you have is we've lost the balance in this country. Germany is still a capitalist society. They still produce BMW, Mercedes-Benz, watches, all the way, luxury fashion goods all the way down the line. But they have a government that's effective, and they also believe that government is part of the solution. In this country, on the right wing, the whole Republican mantra is government is not part of the solution. Government is the problem. Or we need to shrink government to the size that we can drown it in the bathtub. That's what the Republican Party live and believe on. And that's where I would say the Republicans have given up on government and people who subscribe to those policies have.
The separation of church and state. I will say this about the Republican Party. They do seem to latch on to God and Jesus, not Allah, here in the United States, not any other deities. But they definitely do seem to be sort of de facto evangelists these days.
Well, the Texas Republican Party, it's in their platform that they don't believe in the separation of church and state. They state it's not hidden in some sort of backroom policy document. It's stated on their website.
Talk to me about the Koch brothers. You mention them often, and to give all of us a primer on kind of what they're about, who they are, what they're doing.
They're using libertarians to make themselves, and using the Republican Party or the far right-wing Republican Party to enrich themselves. Their whole purpose is to, be the richest human beings on the planet. Their combined wealth is now $55 billion. And now they own the Republican Party, them and a couple of others like Sheldon Adelson. So the Republican Party primary these days is, instead of having, debates, and we saw the clown car debates of 2012, and today, those who wish to be anointed the leader of the Republican Party must travel to the lounge rooms of the Koch brothers or Sheldon Adelson to be anointed by them. It was only because of their money, or particularly Sheldon Adelson in the case of Mitt Romney, that allowed Mitt Romney to win the Republican primary.
So essentially it's oil money, right? These guys are big oil.
Yeah, they've actually made most of their money, or the greater percentage of their wealth, in oil speculation. The Koch brothers is an oil and gas company, employs something like 40,000 employees. They've increased their wealth by 2/3 in the time that Obama has been president, and that's purely on the back of speculating the markets, or the oil markets.
We're talking about buying the Republican Party?
Yeah, and so what they've done now, they're out to completely destroy collective bargaining in this country. So they were big financiers of Scott Walker in Wisconsin. Now, if they take away union protection and everyone, their whole utopian vision is to make America look like China. And interesting, when you remember the 47% remark that Romney made off camera, or made to what he didn't know was a camera in the room.
Remember.
Well, the name of the waiter who took that recording, his name was Scott Proti. And when he released that footage and recording to Mother Jones, he actually didn't think that would be the talking point which would come from that recording. What he thought would be the talking point was Romney told a story how that when he was visiting China with his ultra-capitalist friends, they were touring a Chinese factory which was making American products. And recounting the story how in each room there was 12 workers with one bathroom. They worked 6.5 days per week with 20-minute food breaks throughout the day and working 12-hour days. And as they were walking out of the main entrance, Romney says, and then I noticed that there was this perimeter guard fence all around the factory. And Romney turns to the owner of the factory and says, "What, is this to stop the workers from leaving?" And the owner said, "No, this is to stop other people trying to come in to get jobs here." Now, Romney was telling that story like this was something to boast. So that's the utopian vision that these guys have of America. They have this huge, cheap labor pool that they can draw upon, maximize profits through depressed wages. And that's what you have already playing out now in the southern states of this country. The southern states of the United States are already a third world country. And the rest of this country has to compete with the Deep South or the Republican-controlled South in much the same way the economy of Mexico and the economy of Chile and the economy of China is bad for the American economy, the same way the southern states are bad for the American economy. If you look at California, for example, Toyota just relocated to Texas. Why did they relocate to Texas? They relocated there because lower wages, less pesky union interference, and lower environmental regulation controls. Now, all across the South, they're siphoning jobs and industry from the northern states. Now, California has one or two choices. Do you either maintain some sort of decorum or some sort of modicum of liberal ideals in protecting wages and union and worker rights and so forth, or do you compete in a race to the never-ending bottom, and which will only ensure this entire country does become a third world broken banana republic?
I saw the headline just yesterday. Is it that Burger King is now moving out of the country? I think for reasons of taxation.
Corporate inversion, correct.
I've got area code 607 on the switchboard. You're on the Thinking Atheist Radio podcast. Who's this?
Hi, this is Catherine.
Catherine, you're on the air with my guest, CJ Werleman. Thanks for calling tonight. What do you have for us?
Well, CJ, I thank you guys for having me on the show.
Sure.
I worked for FINRA for about 10 years, which is the acronym stands for the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. And FINRA essentially regulates all of the broker-dealers in the securities market, as well as all the registered representatives and the like, and other various products that the Morgan Stanleys and JP Morgan will come up with. So essentially, I have to disagree with CJ in that the idea that more regulation is essentially going to be the answer. Now, I heard you say you wanted more sensible regulation, but I'm just wondering how we can achieve that, because if you look at the history of the United States, like, for example, in the 1970s, reviews for highway projects took 2 years, and now in 2011 they take 8. In 1956, the laws that authorized the interstate highway system was 29 pages. Now the Frank-Dodd Act is the Dodd-Frank Act is now 14,000 pages. So I'm just seeing this piling on of more and more and more regulations that don't necessarily help, but rather just hamstring the regulator into all of these rules because the examiner doesn't understand it. You mentioned the Securities and Exchange Commission not having enough resources to send some of these bankers to jail. And I don't think that's necessarily true. It's just more of, Morgan Stanley and Fidelity, they can pay a quant, somebody who has far more intelligence than anybody I know, in terms of genius level into coming up with these algorithms and other trading platforms, super montages and the like. The SEC examiner, he's paid a fraction of what this analyst is, and essentially can't understand the products because the intelligence isn't there. So I'm wondering if CJ is expecting a little bit too much from regulation.
Okay, no, it's a good question, and how I would answer that is, first of all, any financial reform which has come out of Congress since the crash in 2008 has been purely for show. Dodd-Frank is, the whole bill is a joke. It hasn't changed any of the fundamentals which led to the crash in the first place. Now, if we look at this historically, now, we had the financial collapse, the market crash in 1929. 4 years later, we had Glass-Steagall, which was then called the Banking Act, and became known as Glass-Steagall. Now, in 1999, the Republican-controlled House and Senate repealed Glass-Steagall with President Clinton signing the bill into law. That led to the whole financial industry, basically the merging of retail banking with investment banking, basically took the banking system and turned it into casino capitalism, which led to the greatest destruction of middle-class wealth we've had in 08 to now, that has been the result of it. Now, and I'll use the words of Elizabeth Warren, and I'm quoting here, and this puts things, I think, into a very good perspective, and it's in my book. And these are her words. From 1797 to 1933, the American banking system crashed about once every 15 years. In 1933, we put good reforms in place, for which Glass-Steagall was the centerpiece. And from 1933 to the early 1980s, that's a 50-year period, we didn't have any of that, none. We kept the system steady and secure. It was only as we started deregulating, when you started hitting Reagan and the savings and loan crisis, and what did? We deregulated some more. And then you hit the long-term capital management at the end of the 90s. And what did we do as a country? This country continued to deregulate more. And then we hit the big crash in 2008. You're not going to defend the proposition that regulation can never work. It did work, and it did work for a 50-year period.
Okay. I hear you. I understand that regulation does work. I'm just starting to become concerned about the cumbersome amount of regulations that don't necessarily make any sense. I mean, now we have, for example, lawmakers in Georgia shutting down little girls' lemonade stands because they don't have the adequate permits. So, I mean, such a silly and ridiculous thing because, I don't know if you subscribe or are familiar with Philip Howard of The Rule of Nobody and thecommongood.org. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I've heard of The Common Good, yeah.
Yeah, essentially the main thrust of his theory, which is a bipartisan, is that, that we're drowning in too much law and no one is free to make sensible choices and then have that responsibility for those decisions. So,
I was going to say that. They're all good discussions to have. I mean, nothing should be unquestionable, and there's always a good argument to be had that government is too big or is too wasteful and those type of things. I come from Australia. I haven't lived there for 12 years, but every time I go back to visit, I think in a lot of areas Australia has gone too far into the regulation and control aspects. Yes, it kept Australia out of the Great Recession, and property values maintained their value all the way through that, and the economy was then robust because of these type of reforms. But also, too, and talking about your lemonade stand, every time I go down there, it really feels like a nanny state. I mean, a lot of my friends say, Australia's great. You can do anything you want as long as you do what you're told.
Right.
It does feel like that. So, yeah, there's always a discussion to be had that controls and social controls go too far.
Catherine, if I may, let's bounce off of the lemonade stand and let's go a little broader in scale and talk about the Affordable Health Care Act. My challenge with Obamacare is that people did not, largely in my opinion, did not love Obamacare. They loved the idea of Obamacare, but they couldn't love the specifics of Obamacare because they essentially had no idea what was in the tens of thousands of pages of legislation that was rammed through so very quickly. And this may speak to what Catherine is speaking about. We're talking about this big behemoth that is essentially handed to everyone. We are told to fall in love with the idea and trust those who are implementing the idea. We love the idea of nationalized health care. We love the idea of not having pre-existing conditions and taking care of people of all shapes, sizes, income brackets in any circumstance possible. We love the idea. The humanist in us responds to that, but we are not given the opportunity to properly vet or hold accountable those who are making that happen. Catherine, does that speak to kind of the vibe of concern that you have?
Well, essentially. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Wegmans at all. It's a grocery store chain headquartered in Rochester, New York. That's where their flagship store is. And essentially, it's a private, closely held corporation that has grocery chains branching out now to New Jersey and Westchester County of New York and Long Island and Virginia and the Eastern Seaboard. Essentially, Wegmans, which has a cult-like following, the oddest thing, used to offer their part-time employees health care as some of the benefits that they could get. They didn't have to, they weren't required to. It was just something that, they did because they actually make, I think they're number one in Fortune's top 100 corporations to work for. And after the implementation of Obamacare, essentially it raised the cost of health care burden on the employer, so much so that they had to stop giving their part-time employees any health care benefits. So depending on whatever economic policy that you necessarily subscribe to, I think what needs to happen is kind of have a happy balance, and as I had mentioned to you in an email, Seth, there's an old adage that people only complain about unfairness when it stops being unfair in your favor. So the reason I am Republican is because I do vote and do have more of a conservative fiscal policy, and the social issues kind of take a back seat to that. And I think that ultimately, what's getting forgotten in this conversation are the moderates. Yes, of course, I have some Republican views and some Democrat views, but where I side mostly with, I guess, would be the Republicans. Now, that's not to say that I don't hate things about my own party. I loathe the fact that they want less government, but that yet want to regulate morality, which, be consistent. If you're going to want less government, then please be consistent. That's all I ask. So I guess that's my concern.
Yeah, if I can just speak to the Obamacare, for example, there's a reason why the Republican Party is trying to repeal it 50 times and they shut the government down over it. There's a reason why Republicans House Republicans are no longer talking about Obamacare. And that reason is it's working. It's working by every measure that it's set out to achieve. It's expanded coverage to 12 million Americans. It's lowered the cost of insurance in the states where it's being implemented properly, i.e. blue states. Having said that, this is my problem with it. This is an example that I talk about this a lot, when I speak, and I've written about this extensively for Salon, is it's still a shitty product. But it's an example of how government can solve a problem, and it did solve a problem. As by expanding coverage to Medicaid in particular, and by allowing people under the age of 25 to stay on their parents' plan, by forcing insurers not to reject people who have the 120 million Americans already have a pre-existing condition. So it's all worked by its own measure. But this is the problem I have. The Democratic Party is no longer a liberal party. There's basically two parties in America. Well, sorry, there's one party in America. It's the business party, and this is not my words, it's been said before. The business party, and the business party has two factions, Democrats and Republicans. Now, the Democrats had unilateral control of Congress when they ran through Obamacare. Now, if they were liberals, then why didn't they ran through universal health care or single payer? And because the Democratic Party has been bought out by corporate interests as well. So the Obamacare is actually a Republican solution first implemented by a Republican governor, and it's a free market solution. That's why I hate it. It should be universal health care like every other Western advanced democracy has.
Catherine, if Mitt Romney runs in 2016, you going to vote for him?
Oh, hell no, he's an idiot.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but go ahead.
Being an atheist does not necessarily mean that I check, my sensibilities and critical thinking at the door, although, CJ seems to think that because I'm a Republican that I do that. And in fact, it's just not true.
You want to pay less in taxes.
Well, to be honest, so, I guess I would be considered part of the top 1% on paper. So my husband and I both own our own businesses, and we have LLCs and other corporations that filter, sole proprietorships that filter through our personal taxes. So on paper, combined between my husband and I, we could make as much as $5 million in revenue, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm taking home $5 million in pay. That money stays in the businesses to pay our employees and the staff and the overhead costs and so on and so forth. So we pay as much as 45% because we also have to pay the employment tax that your employer usually pays, that 7%, and then you pay the other 7%. You pay the entire 14%. So my husband and I pay almost 45% in taxes. Now, there's only so much that you can push and push and push, talking about the balance portion, before that horse just drops dead and ups and says, forget this, I'm going to Costa Rica where it's a 15% tax down there and I can run my business down there. So I encourage either party to focus on the balance of the system and not...
Yeah, my concern as a Liberal is not your business. You're a small to medium-sized enterprise. You're an SME. My concern as a Liberal is that corporations now write the tax code. That is where the hardest lobbying is done in Washington. Now, you're not getting the tax breaks because you're an SME. You don't have lobbyists in Washington, but the big corporations do. Now, you're paying 45%, which I think it should be lower. I think you should be paying less than that. There's no argument there. My problem is that the mega corporations in this country have brought on paper, the federal tax rate looks high compared to other Western, or relative comparatively high with other Western countries at 35%. Most countries are around that, so it's certainly no less than other Western democracies. My problem, however, is that with all the loopholes written into the tax code by the big corporations, that the effective rate, which is the actual rate of tax American corporations pay, is 12%, which actually makes it the lowest effective rate that U.S. corporations pay in the Western world, lower than Mexico. Now, sorry, I was going on to another point from there. But so don't feel free to interrupt.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who does that. I'm the guy now who walks into the room and goes, why did I walk in this room? I do it all the time these days. Go figure. Go figure. Catherine, you're talking about, is it ideologically sound, is it fiscally sound to say we will tax ourselves out of a problem? And it speaks to, in many cases, I'm all about paying your fair share of taxes, whatever's fair. But when taxation becomes an effort to stop the bleeding, when it enables essentially irresponsible behavior on the front end, and I'm over here patching holes on the back end, taxation for many people seems to be kind of, half measures on the very wrong end of the problem.
Yeah, but that's what we've done. We've shifted corporations, the corporate totalitarian state in this country, corporations now under democracy, they have shifted the tax burden in this country from the rich to the middle class. And we've had the greatest transfer of wealth from the middle class to the rich. And we've also, the federal government is receiving its lowest percentage of its total revenue from corporate income than it has in U.S. history. And that's why America no longer has nice things. That's why America looks like a third world country. That's why not a single U.S. airport is ranked in the top 100 airports in the world, and not one U.S. city is ranked in the top 10 most livable cities in the world. That's why we don't have high-speed rail. You go to the third world, you go to Asia, you land in Bangkok, Singapore, Shanghai, Hanoi. Their airports look like space stations. And you get off, you land at the airport, you get straight onto a bullet train, and you arrive in the downtown CBD. You try landing at LaGuardia. Try landing at LAX and see how you go in getting a high-speed rail.
Hey, that's called the D train.
And if there is a hell. Catherine, do you resent...
Yeah.
Do you resent... as a business owner, you've obviously put blood, sweat, and tears into your endeavors, and those who think it's glamorous to be self-employed have no idea what they're talking about, right? But do you find yourself resenting sort of an intrusion into your private business, into your private enterprise? Do you resent the government in that way?
I do. I mean, there's pros and the cons of every situation. The part that I find very resentful is I put up all the seed money, right? That was me. That was my saving through 10 years of working at the regulator, taking my licks, to save up the seed money to start my business. I took on all of the risk, right? And so with all of that risk should come the majority of the reward. Unfortunately, I see a lot, it feels like the government kind of has their hand out to me in this kind of, we want to share in that profit, but yet they're also not sharing in the risk as well. So, if I were to go down, and go bankrupt, I don't get welfare after that because I make too much money. So essentially, part of my frustration as a business owner is essentially the hypocrisy of some of the Democrat Party is that, you don't want capitalism. Okay, fine. But then
oh my God,
also...
What Democrat says that? I mean, it's just absurd. I mean, that's it's a straw man argument. And again, I'm going to quote Elizabeth Warren here again because I dearly love this woman. And she says, quote, "There is nobody in this country who got rich on their own. Nobody. You build a factory out there, good for you. But I want you to be clear. You moved your goods to market on the roads the rest of us paid for. You hired workers the rest of us paid to educate. You were safe in your factory because of police forces and fire forces that the rest of us paid for. You didn't have to worry that marauding bands would come and seize everything at your factory. Now, look, you build a factory and it turned into something terrific or a great idea. God bless. Keep a hunk of it. But a part of the underlying social contract is you take a hunk of that and pay forward for the next good who comes along."
Oh, of course. But, I guess at a certain point, I do become resentful at the government telling me that I have to provide such and such to my employees. I have to pay them exactly this much. There's a lot of government intrusion in the contracts, OSHA requirements and all of that, where, the regulation has a way of kind of drowning out the competitors to, the bigger guys, because it's just way too costly to comply with all of these regulations. Philip Howard does write in a book, The Death of Common Sense, where all of the regulations are focusing on whether or not the handrail regulations of OSHA of 42 inches, if a corporation really needs to spend $300,000 replacing their handrails because they're a quarter of an inch off, So in that way, I feel like that is very wasteful regulation and does absolutely no good. The part where I get frustrated in consumers is that you want the cheapest price available and you're shopping at Walmart, and yet these are the very corporations that essentially you're bitching about. So if you want, fair labor, and ethical labor in, China, and I forget where you said Mitt Romney had said that in visiting the factories, and then you're going to have to pay for it, because across all economic policies, there is no such thing as a free lunch. It's got to come from somewhere. So the consumer ultimately is going to end up having to absorb some of that. And I don't see people getting really gung-ho about visiting local, shopping local, because they're paying more money for it.
No, well, the problem, the common good has to be funded. Coming back to an earlier point that what Seth mentioned, the enterprise is good, and there's people like you, SMEs, which need to be protected, but SMEs in this country haven't been protected, and corporations now are so detached from the human experience and humanism and human reality is because, 50 years ago or 100 years ago, most businesses were small to medium size. There's a big difference between a business that operates on Main Street and you sell, widget X, and you live in the community. You got to treat your staff well. You got to pay them well. You can't rip off customers because everybody knows who you are. But now, pick an industry, and there's really only 4 or 5 companies now which own those industries. Food, Tyson, Kraft, Stegel. Go down the list. Retail shopping. There's Walmart. Search. There's Google. And whatever industry you pick, there's really only 4 to 5 major players, and they just swallow up every small to size medium business. Now, these mega corporations aren't even owned by individuals anymore. They're owned by institutional investors. So the institutional investor sits on the board of these companies. They're so detached from the goings-on in a community, and therefore it makes it easier for these big corporations not to be concerned in the common good.
Do you have a candidate out there? I mean, is there anybody on your radar that you think, man, that would be amazing?
Now, to be honest, Seth, I think I share a lot of what a lot of Americans share in the sentiment that Washington is essentially broken. Broken for many reasons. We can argue all day about that. But when it comes to the candidates, I'm sitting there picking the least worst, because they both suck. So I can remember standing there when Obama, for Obama's first election, and I remember standing there at the polls. I was at 92nd Street in New York City, And I remember standing there and, my finger is hovering above the button. And I just could not live with myself that if I elected McCain and he died, we'd be left with her. And I just couldn't take that risk. So for 20 minutes, I sat at the polls going, well, I don't really like Obama's policies. And I don't care if he's black, yay for a black president. His race has nothing to do with his qualifications, and I don't want to elect him just for that reason, which I had a feeling a lot of people were. But at the same time, I just had my finger, hovering here, which one do I choose? Because either way, I don't see anything good happening out of either door number one or door number two. And I know CJ spoke about the stimulus package, and, I think you kind of have a little bit of a romantic view of it because, in all honesty, that $800 billion stimulus plan, one of the main goals was to support and go towards our infrastructure. But if you looked at the report, barely 3% went to our infrastructure. So, I don't think, yes, of course, it saves some jobs, but like Seth was saying, it's the taxation and let's spend and let's spend and let's spend without plugging up where the money is just kind of bleeding out of this country. For example, the Roosevelt farm subsidies. From 1995 to 2005, the government paid farmers $164.7 billion, which is an average of $16 billion a year, which is more than we pay in direct financial aid to college students via the Bell Grants. So, I just think that we need to plug some holes. And I think a lot more Republicans would be willing to kind of, at least the atheist portion of the Republicans would be willing to shift over to vote more liberally if we could at least plug some of the holes so that we're just not throwing more money at the problem, hoping it's going to go away.
You think there's a lot of atheist Republicans? Maybe they're flying under the radar? I mean, I don't see a lot of them, but I know they exist.
I don't see a ton of them. I know they exist. I certainly, exist. I'm looking at myself, down at myself right now. I'm here, so clearly, we do exist. But,
I think you and I share a kind of, I mean, I'm guilty of cynicism. You look at, you said it, right? It's broken. And yet it's the only system that we have. You look at politicians on both sides of the aisle, and it's easy to just say, geez, come on, there's got to be somebody out there more qualified than this, somebody smarter than this, somebody less self-serving than this. Is there a system where the public servants aren't wined and dined on millionaire book deals and treated like rock stars and essentially forgetting everyone else, but actually represent the people? And when you look at the national deficit and all these things pile up, sometimes it's easy to check out. Perhaps that's what Washington is counting on. But I totally understand the frustrations that you feel. But I do understand your frustration. I hope that you are having success despite the obstacles. I hope you're having success in your endeavors. And I appreciate your perspective on this call very much, Catherine. And I want to apologize because I kind of used you. My voice isn't great, and so you became sort of one of the co-hosts for the last 40 minutes on the radio. You were just so good. I just sat back here and drank my hot tea and cough medicine, and I just let you and CJ do your thing. You guys were fantastic together, and I appreciate your call very much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. But, if I could just add one more thing. I've always said this, and usually it's after a few glasses of wine. I've had none tonight, but, I'll just throw it out there for your viewers. I really, really would love it if the United States would start bringing back the charges of treason. Because I do think that, regardless of what side you're on, Republican, Democrat, it really doesn't matter. The amount of finger pointing and manipulation to the detriment of the common good, I think rises to the level of treason. For a Republican to vote down a Democratic bill just because it's a Democratic bill and we have to make that side look bad, or vice versa, to the detriment of the American people without even looking at what the issue is, I really do think that maybe we could get the politicians under control and stop doing this if we would bring back charges of treason.
Charge them with treason?
I always say, like I said, it's always after a few glasses of wine, but I do have kind of a barbaric view.
Okay, all right. We're going to sit back and we're going to absorb that one, Catherine. Thanks for the call, and thanks for listening and being a part of this community. It means a great deal.
Oh, well, thank you, Seth. Have a good night.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Any other comments on Catherine's perspective?
Yeah, look, I understand. I share a frustration, with the Washington dysfunction. But this is not an accident. This is happening by design. And first I'll deal with the Republican Party on this. The Republican Party is focused on making Washington, D.C. dysfunctional. They don't want any legislation to come out of Washington. The last two Republican Congresses have been the least productive U.S. Congresses in United States history. Now, they've even when they've proposed their own bills and written their own bills, as was the case in the McCain-O'Donnell bill in the Senate, Obama came out and supported it, so they retracted the bill. So they won't let any piece of legislation come out which is productive, and they want to cause gridlock. They want to cause obstruction and nullification, and that's part of their campaign strategy, because their whole campaign strategy is government doesn't work. Now, which political party stands to gain when everybody thinks government doesn't work? Now, the U.S. Congress has a favorable rating, which is less than, a sexually transmitted disease at the moment. But that's by design. They want it that way, because then, everybody goes, oh, Washington, they can't get anything done. Like, that's the government, in which, Congress is the government, and then they stand to benefit. On the flip side of that is my biggest problem with government is the money involved in politics. It's legalized bribery you have in this country, which is so unique to, compared to a lot of Western democracies. Lobbying doesn't happen to the degree you have here, because there's no separation between politics and the corporate state. And therefore, every politician now in Washington should, their judge should look like a NASCAR driver with all the sponsorship on that. That's who they represent. They don't represent the interests of middle-class or the poor, because we don't have lobbyists and we have no say or impact on domestic policy whatsoever. And there's been studies, in a recent study, which just came months ago, said that the bottom 99% in this country have no impact on policy making at all.
My voice is starting to leave me, my friend, but is there any silver lining at all, or is there something specific that you would like to see done to help solve some of the problems? I mean, if these people are wielding by far the largest stick in the playground, in fact, they're the only people there are corporations in the playground, what do the rest of us do?
Oh, yeah, there's not much you can do. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm not optimistic for America's future at all. I think we're going to continue on this spiraling down into a feudal serf model. As I mentioned before, the Republican-controlled South is already a third world country. It's an in-house parasite, basically, which bleeds jobs and, lowers wages and deregulates and pollutes like a third world country and siphons from the rest of the northern states. The other part of the problem is you need to get the money out of politics. But the Congress could write a law now which overrides the Supreme Court's decision that, money equals free speech, citizens united. But I don't see that happening anytime soon, while you've got both parties that are beholden to these free market ideologies, and also that, the corporations writing this law. So getting the money out of politics is one thing. There has to be an ideological shift, which America is so unique that it's probably the most selfish country I've ever been to. And I've lived in 4 countries and I've traveled to another 19 around the world. And in this country, there's no concern for the common good. And liberalism.
Come on,
really
I don't know that that's true, CJ. Come on. There's no concern in the United States of America for the common good. That's a huge statement.
That was an absolute statement, and I'm taking an extreme position. But Christopher Hitchens said it best. He said, and when he talked about the libertarian movement, and he said, only in America is there a movement which Americans say that we aren't selfish enough. Now, liberalism died in this country because you had the Red Scare, communism in the 50s, and the communists with the Senator Joe McCarthy witch hunts, which basically the right wing did a great job in conflating liberalism and socialism with capitalism. And so much so that even Democrats, up until maybe the last few years, have run away from even the term liberal. Oh, no, I'm not a liberal, I'm a progressive, which is the same thing. So unless there's a shift where the Americans go, you know what, we aren't exceptional. There are countries doing it better than us. There are countries which are meeting the economic needs of their people better. In fact, if you look at the UN World Development Index, if you look at the UN World Happiness Index, if you look at the Social Progress Index, on all of these index which rate the happiness of a citizenry, the state's or the country's ability to meet the economic needs of its people, America ranks dead last amongst Western developed nations. And the results are conclusive. People are happier. People are happier, more economically secure in countries where the size of the state is bigger and where taxes on the rich and corporations are greater, that are there to fund the common good. But we have this libertarian movement. We have this free market ideology which says that corporations that are rich are holier than thou. We turn billionaires into stars and celebrities, and we move away from that thinking that the free market is not the answer to everything, and America will not be able to solve its societal ills.
It's funny. I live in a part of the world where people hold up a big foam finger, red, white, and blue foam finger, and just shout, "We're number one, right? We're the greatest country on the face of the earth." And for them, that's enough. The statistics, regarding education and the economy and scientific progress and all those types of things don't really come into play. It's more tribalistic.
Jim Jeffries, a stand-up comedian, he's an atheist.
Yeah.
Yeah, he said it best. He said, America, number 29 in education, but number 1 in self-confidence.
That's absolutely right. Well, I'm sure you'll get some emails after this show. By the way, if you want his address, you can send it to he doesn't really give a shit at CJ Werleman. No, I'm just kidding. Well, it's been a compelling show. The whole time I'm listening to you, I'm like, he doesn't sound like much of an American. He doesn't sound like he belongs here. Don't make me charge you with treason, man, because that's the temperature of this conversation.
Yeah, I take away my comment, all Americans are selfish. You did take me out to lunch in Tulsa. That was very kind.
The book is called Atheists Can't Be Republicans. Forgive me, I'm medicated. What's the subtitle again?
If facts and evidence matter.
And I'll include a link to the book in the description box of this show. I can pretty much guarantee you, having read it, it is a compelling piece by CJ. CJ, thanks for being a part of the show, for a compelling perspective on all of this, and just for being a great guest. It's always a pleasure to have you on the radio.
Mate, thank you very much for having me on. It's always great chatting with you, mate, and very much appreciated.
All right, we'll talk soon. Take it easy.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you for being patient with me tonight while I sort of speak over the raspiness in my voice. Had a good time during the show. Next Tuesday night is a freestyle show. I had enough people say that they wanted just another free-for-all where we can talk about anything that comes to mind, anything that's on your mind. Fine, let's do that. So if you have a perspective, a question, a comment, an opinion, something on anything, you can email it to podcast@thethinkingatheist.com. I'll see you next week on the Thinking Atheist Radio Podcast. Take it easy.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.